We're going to go ahead and start the meeting if everybody's ready. If everyone who is able, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so it appears we are starting the meeting with the school choice public hearing. So is anyone here to speak? If not, I think that we could, actually, Allison, can you just give us a brief
Sure.
understanding of what school choice is exactly and what we're voting for?
Right. It's a school district and a school committee must vote to opt out of school choice if you do not want to participate in school choice. And under the law, school choice is a default in the state of Massachusetts. And what it means is students from neighboring districts would be able to come to Westborough to attend school here. And along with them, there would be a tuition that comes to the district. But that tuition amount is, it's quite low. It's $5,000 per student. So it doesn't come anywhere close to matching the per pupil expenditure that we use here. And I know historically the school committee has voted to opt out of school choice, and I would recommend that you continue to do so at this time. Although if the sort of winds around you change, if something changes in neighboring districts, it may be worth reassessing at that point. But for now, I'd recommend continuing to do what you've done in the past few years. I think the key is we have to make a decision and inform the State Department of Education by June 1st. So this vote is in time so we can make sure we do that. Otherwise, they assume you're opting in.
Just for the public, can you just clarify if we are to vote no, meaning that we would be opting out, or vote yes to opt out? In that event, are kids from our district still able to go elsewhere if they chose to do so?
To go to schools where they have offered choice,
yes.
Or for other reasons go to,
right.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you can go other places. Okay. This is around us receiving students. Yeah.
Great. Go ahead.
A little more background in the program. For many years, we had no room in the school system for students from outside of the district, in the fact that we built, remodeled schools, built new elementary school, remodeled the high school, and that was the primary reason in the past, is because we didn't have room for any new students. Although we have a few seats now that we didn't have before, as Allison said, that to accept students for which we would receive revenue only a third of what it really costs us to educate students. In effect, our taxpayers would be carrying that burden. And I think that's also the background as to why in the past the school committee has opted out of this program. So I would agree that in fact we should vote to opt out.
So I think that in the past, we've sort of informally taken this vote, and Allison was kind enough to do a little bit of research and pull up the actual statutory language that's required for us to go through that process. I'm going to go ahead and read it, make the motion, and then open it up for discussion, and then we can take a vote, if that's okay. Whereas the Educational Reform Act of 1993 requires that the enrollment of non-resident students under the school choice provision, unless the committee votes by June 1st not to participate, and whereas the school choice provision reallocates funds from the sending district and awards such funds to the receiving district, and whereas the maximum reimbursement allowed by the school choice provision is less than Westborough's per pupil expenditure, which means Westborough Public Schools would not be required to subsidize each choice student, and whereas once Westborough accepts a choice student, Westborough must keep such student through graduation regardless of whether Westborough's demographic situation has changed, and whereas it is likely that a number of students will return to their sending districts or otherwise leave Westborough, thus creating a potential income loss, now hereby be resolved that this Westborough School Committee respectfully declines to participate in the school choice program, provided, however, that if surrounding districts subsequently and prior to June 1st decide to accept the provisions of school choice, the Westborough School Committee reserves the right to do likewise in order to protect its fiduciary interests in this matter.
So move.
All in favor? Oh, do we have any discussion? My apologies.
Yeah, I have a question. Just for information, are you aware, Allison, of how many schools in the state participate in this?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can find that information for you. It's posted online, and they'll be reposting shortly after June 1st once everybody gets there.
I mean, it's not going to change my decision, but I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you know how many students from our districts actually go out for
I don't
know.
have that information. Daniel, do you have a sense?
I don't think any go out to other public schools. We have a couple of students who go to charters, which is different than going to a regular public school. But there's students who go to private schools, but no, they don't choice out.
Any other comments or discussion?
And just a point of clarification on the way the motion is written. So a yes vote is a vote to opt out. So it's a kind of
Right.
a little bit of a counterintuitive vote. I just want to make that clear for everybody and the viewing public.
Yep. Can I get all in favor, please?
Aye.
500, so we have now opted out of that. The next thing on our agenda is your student superintendent's update.
Great, and we have a number of guests here to present some updates about things going on in the school district, and I'm going to turn it just immediately over to them. The first person up tonight is Alex Pilger, our Director of Guidance at the high school, who has put together a presentation just to kind of walk you through what's going on with our school counseling program.
Thanks, Allison, and thank you, everybody, for having me here to speak about the school counseling department at the high school. Again, I'm Alex. I'm proud to be here representing the school counseling department. I wanted to go through a couple different things about what we do as school counselors at the high school. I think that school counseling as a field is pretty broad, and it changes drastically level to level from elementary school all the way to the high school. And so I can speak clearly about what the high school does, and it's a really interesting role. I also want to talk about what a typical school year looks like for the school counseling department, the major activities that we're working on at any given time. I want to highlight some data about students that are coming to visit the school counseling department. I have some, what I think is interesting data about college applications and college acceptances from Westborough High School this year. And then I have some plans to highlight about what students are up to this graduating senior class after high school. So thank you for your attention. So quickly, this is our current high school counseling department. We have 6 school counselors, that's including myself, and we have 1 school adjustment counselor. The role differentiation there is that adjustment counselors almost entirely work with students on social emotional concerns, whereas school counselors have a broader range in terms of the work that they're doing with students, which I'll highlight in a little bit. Also, just the caseload sizes range drastically between those 2. School counselors, we're making a shift toward working with students based on their last name and breaking up alphabetically. That's been done in certain ways in the past, but we're trying to implement a pretty consistent alphabetical breakdown so that people are working with the same counselors year to year. But on average, the school counselors have around 200 students for their caseload. They work with students for all 4 years, so they get to build those relationships with students. The adjustment counselor has a smaller caseload where she's working with students who have been identified to need some extra support in the social emotional range. So this is our team. That's our school counseling mission. We work to support all students in different elements. I mentioned the social emotional range, but we also work with students on post-secondary planning for life after high school. We work with students on navigating the academic challenges of high school and planning their academic trajectory. All of this kind of comes together to make like a pretty broad role for what the school counselor is. So I wanted to kind of just break down these 3 components that make up the majority of the high school counselor's job. I think that parents and students interact with school counselors in a very different way depending on what their needs are. Perhaps all students are interacting with their counselor to talk about post-secondary planning throughout their high school career, and some have more interactions with their counselor based on social emotional support. So these are the 3 areas that we really focus on, and when we work with students for 4 years, it's helpful because while I'm highlighting these as very separate entities, there's a lot more overlap between post-secondary planning and academic advising, or post-secondary planning and social emotional support than this is suggesting as separate focuses. And so really we're working with students to help them identify plans for life after high school that are good fits for them. If that's college, helping them navigate the college application process, helping them identify potential career paths that match their interests and their strengths. That work is extensive and ongoing, and it's something that I think we all feel really passionate about doing, but with 200 students, it's something I wish we could honestly have more time doing, because students deserve that level of support in navigating the career and future planning process. A lot of the work that we do is around supporting students who are struggling emotionally or socially. That could be in one-on-one counseling, group counseling. We have a significant process of identifying students using universal mental health screeners, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And then really just trying to build plans for them that help them learn skills to navigate the day-to-day of the school environment and just their outside lives. And then lastly, we support students with planning their high school trajectory. Often that's in relation to their plans for life after high school, but some students are not. Often, really many students are not sure what their plans are going to be in detail after high school, so we support them in trying to choose appropriate coursework. If they're struggling in particular classes, we help them devise plans to get support. We help students change trajectories if they're feeling like they're not in the right classes. It's kind of all-encompassing around academic support. We tend to be point people for students in all of these realms. So I mentioned that I wanted to go through what a typical year looks like for the school counseling department. I'll just note that these are like highlights that are happening at different points throughout the year. There are ongoing things that we're working with students on, like counseling itself is not listed as a task, as something we're doing on here. Navigating support around 504 plans, which is a counseling responsibility, that's not on here. There are ongoing tasks that we're doing on a regular basis, supporting students with academic needs. But we do have these kind of like waves of big projects that we're working on that take a lot of the attention. In the next slide, I'll show you kind of how that plays out on a day-to-day basis. But you'll see at the start of the year, we're talking about transitions. We're meeting our new 9th graders, welcoming them in an orientation. We're trying to build those relationships because we're hoping to have them for 4 years. We're meeting new students who are moving into the district and needing to pick classes and get comfortable with a new school environment. So it's all about transition at the start of the year. Students who maybe needed extra support at the middle school, we're working with counselors at the middle school to make that transition as smooth as possible. September and October, the school year starts kicking in, and students have a lot of opportunities to change classes at the beginning of the school year around like an add drop period. We're supporting students in making those decisions, learning about what's available to them. That tends to be a pretty concentrated period of time where kids are making those changes. And then we kind of jump really hard into supporting our seniors through the college application or their post-secondary planning process, and that takes essentially the bulk of September and October. We meet with all of our seniors individually just to find out what their plans are and support them in navigating the steps that they need to take. A lot of the times that process is looking at students' lists of colleges, if that's the trajectory that they're planning, and trying to support them in building a rounded and full list of colleges. We also do things in larger groups that are more appropriate for less individualized conversations at that point. I mentioned earlier that we do universal mental health screening with all of our students throughout the school year. We do it on a grade-to-grade basis. So we'll start with our 9th graders first thing in the fall, but you'll see 9th and 10th happens between November and December. That requires a certain amount of resources from the counseling department to do the follow-up with students who are identified as needing extra support. In January and February, we shift our attention for post-secondary planning back to our juniors. We have a junior evening event where we invite parents and families and students to come and learn more about what the year between 11th and 12th grade looks like. We follow up with those 11th graders individually to support them. We have our 12th grade screening, universal mental health screening. We just completed kind of the course selection process where students plan for the next school year. It always feels very early to do that in February, March, but that's the time where before we start building a master schedule for the next year. So having conversations about elective choices, appropriate placement, balance, where, kids are taking challenging but not overwhelming course balances. And then we're at this point in the year now where we're looking forward to graduating our seniors, helping them potentially plan for their transition to the next phase of their lives, whether that's with support emotionally or whether that's with just trying to make decisions. A lot of times, tomorrow is May 1st, that's decision day for college. A lot of seniors have already made their choices up at this point, but we do support students and families when they're trying to weigh the pros and cons of different options. And then hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at trying to help students make changes to their schedules for next year, meaning if they have conflict with their schedules where they don't get something that they wanted or there's two courses that run at the same time and they have to make a choice, that's something that we'll support through the end of the year. So again, these are just kind of like big bullet points that drive some of the work that we're doing. And I wanted to kind of give a visual of what that looks like. So we have a sign-in and sign-out sheet at the entrance to the counseling department that anytime a student is visiting a counselor, they check in, they say who they are, who they're meeting with, and what the general purpose of their meeting is. There's a couple different options that we give students because sometimes it's not specific enough for them, but in our mind, they code as post-secondary, social, emotional, and academic. And that's intentional to make sure we're knowing, the general reasons why students are coming to visit school counselors. And so this is just a graph throughout the school year so far about the percentage of school counseling visits that are of certain natures in those three areas. So you'll see August is very short in terms of how long we're here. The vast majority of the meetings that we have in August are academic in nature, but almost immediately when we move into September and October, you'll see there's a giant shift. This aligns with what I was talking about in terms of what our focus is. Post-secondary planning becomes the primary task from October to November, but then it tapers off. And you'll see it picks up again in January and February when we're meeting with those juniors. So I just find this graphic kind of interesting because it really highlights the ebbs and flows of the work that we're doing throughout the year. You can see that the social emotional needs they're constant, but they peak in November and December, not only because that can be a challenging time of year for students, but also because that's when we're doing a lot of concentrated mental health screening work. So overall, you can see on the right, I have just a couple highlights. We had 4,780 counseling visits at the time that I pulled this data this year. The vast majority of those were pre-scheduled. We have an option for students to select that they need it's a drop-in appointment, meaning they're distraught or they don't have an appointment. Again, there are a significant number of those, but the vast majority are things that have been planned with a counselor ahead of time. We've seen 1,010 unique students at some point throughout the school year. I recognize that that's not every single student, and that's a goal that I'd like every single student to meet with their counselor at least once during the year. You'll see that sometimes we have really busy days where we have 59 students in and out of the counseling office. There are days that are less hectic than that, but it can be kind of a revolving door on some of those days, especially around the academic stuff where it's quick conversations with students. And then when you break out the overall visits into those three domains, you'll find that the work is pretty balanced. We're doing a pretty balanced amount of post-secondary work, social and emotional work, and academic work. You'll note that if you were to do the math, that doesn't equal 100% of visits. There is an option on the sign-in form for kids to say they don't know why they got called down to the counseling office, which a certain number of students do take advantage of. If I had to bet that those are probably equally distributed between the areas. So I find this interesting. I think it really visually captures the work that we're doing on a daily basis. I wanted to shift to kind of the college admissions work that we're doing and some of the data that I pulled from Naviance. Naviance is a computer program that every student has an account in, and they're able to not only navigate the document management part of the college application process, but we data track acceptances, denials, where students are attending. All of our data is tracked for college admissions in here. So I pulled some data recently. I recognize that this is not, we have not received every piece of data from our senior class at this point because, again, tomorrow is the decision day, but a vast majority of students had already submitted the results of their applications and their senior plans. And this was just one thing that I wanted to highlight that I thought was interesting, which is I broke down the senior class by weighted GPA, which is just a measure of academic performance over their high school career. And I broke it into percentiles. So you'll see the first percentile is just the students with the top 10% highest weighted GPAs. Match that up with what that group had for median weighted GPA and median SAT score. And the thing that I found really interesting is that you'll see the top 10% of the class, while they have obviously the highest median weighted GPA and the highest median SAT score, they actually have the lowest median acceptance rate in college, which that percentage is a representation of the number of schools that they get into divided by the number of schools that they apply to. And that is true. It's lower than even the 80 to 90% percentile, which is 40%. And I draw that conclusion because that's representative of what we're seeing when we're working with students, is that high achieving students are often applying to an enormous number of very, very selective colleges. And with that comes a lot of rejection. And so we have to navigate that on the post-secondary side, but also on the social emotional side for kids when they have to hear that information. What's interesting is that, you kind of move into the next couple percent, like deciles of this data, and all of a sudden we're at 60%. And I think that that's really representative of students making thoughtful lists, like thoughtful college lists, where they have some places that we would call reach schools that are maybe they fall below the average in terms of an admitted student, but it's filled with things that are safer bets and good fits, and it ends up being like, a pretty balanced list for college admissions purposes. So I think this is just one, there's a lot of interesting data that I think that comes out of the Naviance program, but this is one I wanted to highlight for everybody. This is just a map of the 20 most popular colleges that Westborough High School students are applying to. A lot of this probably isn't surprising just geographically, but what I wanted to highlight is just that our students are typically looking to go to either state universities in Massachusetts, state universities in other regional states around the area, or more selective private schools that are within New England. So, Northeastern, Boston University, WPI, these are like relatively local private selective colleges. So this is not surprising to pull this data. The number of applicants that we have to these schools is pretty high. I'm gonna show this very overwhelming slide with a lot of colleges. At this point, again, I said we have a majority of the seniors' plans put in terms of where they plan to go if they're going to college next year. There was no really easy way for me to present this information. This is a massive list of currently where we've been told that students are planning to attend for college next year. I think the list is really fantastic because it's widely representative of different types of schools. Geographically, it's incredibly wide-ranging. If we have kids, obviously many kids staying regionally and locally, but we have kids traveling across the entire country to go find an education as their next step. So, I think each one of these cases is its own individual. I mean, we have some schools on here where we have 10 students who are attending. Typically every year UMass Amherst is where we send the most number of students, but each school individually has we have a lot of kids one kid going to a particular school, and some schools that are more commonly attended by students. So. I also want to highlight that we have some students who are not attending four-year colleges, and actually two-year colleges are on the previous slide too. They're not attending higher education in that sort of form. But we have some students who are planning to serve in the military. We have students going to different types of specialized training schools, whether it's electrical school or culinary school. We have students who are planning to either continue work that they've already started or kind of try to find full-time work. We have students who are transitioning from the high school supports to the borough program as a next level of support. We have some students who are going to dance school and to perform in performing arts ensembles. And then we have students who are taking gap years. Dynamy is a specific gap year where students are essentially taking a year where they're having a life experience and a different form of educational experience before they choose what their next step is. So again, we have students with a lot of different plans for life after high school. Obviously the majority in Westborough are attending four-year colleges and then two-year colleges, but we do have representation about a lot of different plans for life after high school. I just want to finish with this. These are just some areas of focus for the school counseling department right now. We manage 504s at the high school, plans for students who have areas of impairment that need accommodation. That's what a 504 plan is at the high school level. We've been working in some teams across schools to facilitate smooth transitions from building to building and make sure that there's process consistency between counselors, developing and implementing these plans at different schools. Something that the entire school counseling department is passionate about is our career development work. I think we're only hamstrung by the amount of time that we get to work with students. The work that we are doing around career development is often happening in singular classroom-based lessons where we jump into a history class for a day and do a lesson on values or strengths or interests, and then we do it individually. There's, I think, a plethora of more work that we could be doing. It's just a matter of time with students to do that work. So I think we're hoping to evaluate the curriculum that we currently have for career development and try to find ways to have more touch points with students to talk about the things that impact career choices and life after high school. All the counselors have very different experiences around the college application process, whether because they have different levels of experience in this role, or we even have somebody who was an admissions counselor at a college before this job. We're trying to create a more systemic understanding of the college application process so that all students, regardless of their counselor, can be privy to the same information. So that's something we're working on, is just making sure that there's consistent knowledge and information between each counselor. And then lastly, I mentioned that we have a vast majority of students who are attending college after high school, but we'd really like to work on trying to identify and develop more clear support for students who are not planning to attend college after high school, because I think we have a very structured level of support for students who do plan to attend college, and there's an opportunity that we're missing to really support kids in the way that they deserve if they're not planning on that trajectory. Anyway, I appreciate everyone's attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'll open it up for questions. Steve, do you have any questions or
Yes,
comments?
I do. Have you had any open houses for any of the military, either schools or branches of the service?
Yeah. So open houses is maybe not the word I would use, but we different branches of the military have representatives who come and actually set up what we call a table at lunch, and they interact with students on a kind of a more natural basis as they walk by the table, and they interact in that way. So we, in the fall of every year, we have what are called representative visits for colleges, and so college representatives who are just admissions people from colleges sign up and they come to visit Westborough High School, and students then sign up for those meetings to meet with the representatives. So some academies are represented in that, but to be honest, there's a limited number of those spots available, and it's whoever gets to whatever school gets to sign up first. But really, I'd say the most common way that students are interacting with military service is through the tables that are set up at lunch, which we have multiple branches that are represented in that way.
And my second question is the list of colleges. I'm not sure that I understood whether they were the list of colleges to which applications were given or where they actually got in.
It's actually neither. I just pulled the slide back up. This is a list of colleges where students are planning to attend. So
So it's their wish.
No, it's where they are committing to go to next year for freshman year.
And accepted there.
Yeah, so correct. So we have had, inherently, we've had students accepted at all of these colleges because we're having students go there. The font would have had to be remarkably smaller if it was every school that students applied to. But, it similarly is representative of kind of like any type of school around the country or even internationally.
Yeah, that's a clear answer. Thank you.
Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This was great, thank you. I just have a couple of questions. So it sounds like the 6 of you do the work of like 24 people, because it's a lot of work, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, my first question is 6 enough? I mean, is the number of counselors enough?
It's a great question. So I think it depends on what the bar is for the level of support that students are getting. To be like completely transparent, we are functional at 6 counselors. But I don't like. I think that certainly if we had 12 counselors, kids would get better support, like undoubtedly. And I think that's, we're in education, like that's true pretty much regardless of how you look at it. But I mean, I think that the way that we model things is that students need, depending on their profiles, they just need different levels of support. I have plenty of students who can navigate the post-secondary process relatively independently. I might check in with them once their junior year, once their senior year, and they're all set. Do I think that student could still benefit from touch points? Absolutely, but that does not become my priority. I have other students who have higher levels of need. So it's kind of like a response to the need and trying to identify students who need more support. So that's the model by which we're navigating with a 200-to-1 ratio. I will say that that's aligned, the 200-to-1 ratio is aligned with ASCA, which is our national certifying board's recommendations about what caseload sizes could be. I think that the challenge with those recommendations is that the specific roles and the specific demands on a counselor are very different even from a school-to-school basis. The demands in Westborough might be different than the demands in another town, even within Massachusetts. So a national board's just making like a very general recommendation about where they see the ratio. I mean, it's easy. I think almost anybody in education would say it would be nice if we had significantly more staffing. But as somebody who really believes in the work that we're doing, and that I know that when I have time, the quality's better, and that one of the biggest barriers to supporting kids in the domains that I highlighted is time. So.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like it's so expansive what you do. So. And I know that I really like the graph and it was really clear. I imagine that some of these appointments and, students just take longer. And so are you able to balance that? Like if one of your counselor has a high caseload of kids that have, a lot of, or don't need much support, are you able to shift things around a little bit? Because it seems like that might.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there's pros and cons to doing that. I think the benefit of having very consistent caseload alphabet breakdown is the consistency with families. About knowing that because if we were to make shifts, that would affect people in the downstream from a caseload breakdown standpoint. I guess I don't want to leave out the fact that we are not the only supports in the building for mental health needs, or academic needs. I do think we're pretty much the major show in town for post-secondary planning. But when students have severe, emotional needs or pretty significant academic needs, our role becomes helping them getting those supports, which might be provided by a different professional in the building. So I don't want to make it sound like we're navigating every single one of these challenges alone. But yeah, I think that my philosophy is that that stuff ends up working itself out over time. That we have 4 grades. I think it just ends up happening in the profession that some years you'll just have a really demanding caseload, you know, like I'm not saying this is true for me, but like sometimes it's like my ninth grade is a tough group, you know, they have a lot of needs, but that over the 4 years that it all tends to even back out. I know like numbers don't totally represent the demands on an individual counselor, but I think as a team, we work well together, that if we really were in a pinch and we felt like we didn't have the time to support a student, I mean, we prioritize like most pressing needs, safety, health, emotional needs, like that's going to take priority. And if somebody is preoccupied with something like that, we're going to tag somebody else in on an individual case basis, but probably not on a long-term relationship basis, if that makes sense.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And then my last question is, so I know if we could expand the number of counselors, that would be great. I mean, I really hope that we could do that, because I think it sounds like a huge workload. But what do you think the needs of the department are? I mean, beyond that, like if you could, are there any needs like, you know, training, anything like that?
I tried to highlight, I guess, some of the areas that I think are most actionable, in terms of like the areas of focus here. I mean, I think that the kind of the shared knowledge piece of it, you know, we all have, like I said, have very different experiences, and I think there's opportunity for more consistency. That doesn't really solve the like time issue, but just from a service providing issue, like I think that kids deserve the same level of support and information regardless who their counselor is, and it's not really a fault of a counselor if they've never been exposed to the information that they need to provide to a student. It's the world of, you know, post-secondary planning in particular is just like complicated, and it's almost impossible to keep up with everything at all times. So I think that that's one area. I mean, this is my second year in this role here, not my second year as a counselor in general, but in Westborough. And I've been working kind of to try to smooth processes to make the time be more convenient. So like working in the 504 process, my hope is that, you know, by clarifying steps and transitions that we end up that has downstream effects on the work that we're doing, so that if we save time by having a clearer process, we're doing less of the back end work. And I think as the head of the department, like that's a lot of the work that I'm trying to do, is identify where processes or protocols would benefit the valuable time that we have so that more students can be served.
Great, thank you. Thanks for all your work.
Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I thought it was an excellent presentation. I like the format. I applaud you for using Canva for it. It was
First time, it was fascinating.
It was very pleasing. I like that it was data heavy. You know, you collected a lot of statistics. I think like that too. So I find it very informative. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
I'm curious about a couple of things. One is do you see any trends in the social emotional challenges over the year? Anything that I mean, you've only been here for 2 years, so.
Well, here, yes. This is my eighth or ninth year as a school counselor. So I mean, I think some things are unique to Westborough, obviously, and then some things are I work with teenagers in high school, and I've worked in Massachusetts my entire career. So there's a lot more similarity than there are differences in that. I mean, I think that if I could highlight the social and emotional things that I think are unique here, I think that there is a lot of perfectionism that we work with students trying to navigate, you know, very high expectations that students have of themselves. I think there's there's a level of healthy competition, and then on a case-by-case basis, it borders on unhealthy competition. I think that those factors impact students, I think, uniquely in a way that it's not, that's not a universal experience for high school students across the country or across the state right now. I think that's a little bit more local. We're a high-performing district with very strong students, very strong staff who, you know, I think some of it comes with the territory, but it does have a secondary effect on the needs of the students. And, you know, that's a lot of the work that we do throughout the year, is trying to help students navigate their internal struggles around failure or struggle, or, you know, like that's all normal experiences, you know, but it can be really hard for students. And so I would say that's the universal thing that we see throughout the year. You know, I think seasonally, things are very different. You know, the emotional needs are, you know, tied to what's going on in kids' lives. You know, the fall's a lot of kids stressing about college applications, you know. So some of those kids that signed in as post-secondary planning meetings, they were social emotional meetings. You know, like that's what I mean. I'm trying to simplify it, but there's a lot more overlap than it really looks like.
I guess out of all the social emotional challenges, that's not a bad one to be dealing with, the perfectionism.
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, like, just to be totally honest, like, I think that when you have a student who is struggling with a challenge of like what realistic expectations are, or how to handle setbacks and failure, I guess it's hard to like weigh, you know, like what's easier or harder to deal with. I think it's all challenging, and I think the work that we do with students is sometimes complemented by work that kids are doing outside of school with other supports, if that's the level that they need. You know, I guess I understand what you mean, and that it's a good problem in that it reflects the quality of the education the kids are getting, and you know the demands that the students really you know, good rigorous demands that they have. I think it just is a real challenge that kids are having, and you know, if they weren't going to face it in high school, they may face that later down the line, realistically, in their lives.
Thank you. A few more questions. Could you say how many students did not make it to any post-secondary school this year?
0. Any students that wanted to go to post-secondary school that did not, 0.
That's great. Okay. That's great. Other question. I noticed on the list, I was looking for the big names like Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Stanford, Yale. I didn't see them.
You did not.
Yeah. But I imagine that at least some of the students, the top 10 percentile applied.
You're correct.
So I'm wondering, do you see any way our district could improve? There are areas where we could improve to make that happen?
That's a very hard question. I guess, I mean, I am not an Ivy League college admissions representative. I've spoken to Ivy League college admissions so like we've had those schools come visit during the college representative visits that I've spoke about, and I asked the same question, you know, of them. They didn't give me a particularly concrete answer, to be totally honest. Like the best answer they gave me, and I'll take this with a grain of salt, is that it's possible that other schools have legacies that are making it easier for students to get in. So legacy admissions is still in place at many Ivy League schools, where if you have a relative who went to the school, that it changes the math of whether you get in or not. I mean, that's the answer that I was given by an Ivy League admissions representative. I think that that's an oversimplification, to be honest, of what's really going on. I don't have a great answer for you about what it is. I think, to be totally honest, that sometimes, like if you go back, this is just this year's class, like we have historically had students get into Ivy League schools at different points, but the numbers have never really been enormous. You know, it might be 1 student or 2 students that get into 3. And so I mean, these schools are the most selective schools in the world. You know, we're talking schools with 3 to 5% acceptance rates, and that's it. I think it's math at the end of the day. If you had to ask me, I think that it's just a matter of time, to be honest, that we get some kids in here and there. And I don't think it's as simple as what could we do differently. If it were, I would have more answers, to be honest.
I mean, there are a lot of great schools on that list.
Of course.
Yeah. But I'm more pleased to hear that there are 0 students that did not make it to
anybody who wanted to pursue an education is able to at a post-secondary institution. Yep.
Yeah, that's most important. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Go ahead, Tim.
Start by saying thank you for the presentation. I was also impressed by the Canva, so.
Thanks.
So my first question would be, I know that you said that one of your goals is to meet with every student at least once a year. Are you aware of any districts pursuing this, and especially anyone's doing it successfully?
Not on off the top of my head. The challenges that we face from a staffing perspective are not unique to Westborough by any means. Like we are, in fact, the ratio that I said of like 200 to 1, this is, in the scheme of things, a very good ratio for school counselors to students. So I think that any school would be not struggling, but like it wouldn't happen unless somebody made it an active goal necessarily to do that. I'm not personally aware, but I'm positive. I mean, like philosophically, this is something that a school counselor would want to make sure is happening, that kids were having the touch point with the counselor during the year. So I not off the top of my head, but I'm sure that there are other schools that are trying to accomplish that goal.
Sure. And so I agree that I think it'd be incredibly valuable just to have the students, be aware and familiar with what that would look like.
Yeah.
And so I know you talked a little bit about the mental health screeners, but I'm assuming that when they're taking that, there isn't like a direct, like they're not going into the counselor's office, anything like that. Could you just describe a little bit of the follow-up process that you were talking about, the work that goes on there?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So the screening process is that students take, it's a survey that they take in their classrooms, directed by their teachers, all simultaneously on a particular day within a specific grade. So if we were screening the 9th grade, for example, period 2 on a Tuesday in the fall, all 9th graders are sent this survey. They fill it out during that period. And then throughout the rest of the day, the first step of follow-up is identifying students at significant risk based on the results of the screener. The screener is identifying symptoms that are consistent with anxiety and depression, and there is a question about self-harm and suicidal ideation on the screener. And so we prioritize students who are exhibiting concerns that are safety concerns. And so usually that's the first step of follow-up, is making sure that all those students are met with, and we're screening them for any potential dangerous situation. From there, it gets a little bit more specific depending on what the needs of the student are. We meet with any student who meets a particular threshold of like answers on either. There's like 2 elements of the screening tool that we use. One is more focused on symptoms that are consistent with anxiety, and one is more consistent with symptoms consistent with depression. And so if a student is elevated on either or both of those, the first step is that we meet with them and we follow an interview process to try to get at what might be contributing to those symptoms, and then from there it becomes more individual. Like some students participate in groups from that point if that's what they're ready for. Some students meet with counselors individually for a short period of time. Some students might be more appropriate to be meeting with our adjustment counselor if they need a longer window of support. So the follow-up is kind of gets individualized in a way depending on not only the level of need of the student, but also what they're willing to do. At the end of the day, with counseling, you can't make somebody participate who doesn't want to participate. I think our job, not to connect to this meeting with every kid, is our job is to make kids feel comfortable, make them feel like counseling isn't a terrifying thing to participate in. And hopefully by doing that, when we're having these hard conversations with kids, they might be a little bit more willing to try it out. And then from there, we see how they're progressing depending on, what the area of need really is.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I know that we have already talked at some length about the capacity of your department, but I am curious. I know that on the slide that you had, there was 59 visits was the max in one day. I know that also on that slide, it talked about how the vast majority of the sessions are pre-scheduled, but is there any issues around capacity in a specific day, any time that a student has an emergency, something like that they go down to the department and all the counselors are busy?
That has happened. So we have an administrative assistant who is the front face of our department. Her name is Gail Kennefick. She's awesome. And she receives students who are entering the office without an appointment and kind of goes through a series of questions to establish what their area, what the level of need might be. In that scenario, if a student were to indicate they really needed to meet with a counselor immediately, she knows that she can interrupt us. I think there's no scenario where all of the counselors would be all dealing with crises at the same time. I think people have different definitions of crisis, but I think if a student, if she establishes that the student is in a crisis and needs to have somebody meet with them, she might have them sit down for 5 minutes, and then she'll go check in with a counselor and say, hey, I have a kid who I really need somebody to check in with. Like, is this something that you can wrap up or maybe catch up with later? Because, if I'm in an academic or a post-secondary meeting and a student of mine comes down in crisis, I will reschedule with the student that I'm with to make sure that again, like, that's the priority, is like health, safety, emotional safety. We're gonna reschedule things that are not meeting that level of need.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then my final question, I know that on the alternative pathways, something that was called out was electrical school as well as culinary school.
Yep.
Vocational schools and access to seats is something that a lot of us have been thinking about recently. And I understand that you might not be able to speak on individual students, but generally, have you seen, and again, I'm not sure if you can comment on this, but like, have you seen those students that end up going into those schools have interest in vocational schools, and that's something that they wanted to do before and weren't able to get seats? Or is it students that end up finding that even if they weren't interested in vocational schools before?
A mix of both. I mean, I think that some of it is students who have identified career paths that they're interested in pursuing, and they realize that it doesn't require a four-year education to pursue a particular skill. I mean, I think honestly, like, sometimes I think that students identify, this is not true of these students specifically, but sometimes students identify alternative paths because they're really not sure what they want to do. Like, and they know that school has been challenging for them, and so they, it's easy to say, all I know is I don't want to keep doing this. And so, I do think that students feel a lot of pressure to have an answer to the what do you want to be when you grow up question. It's often a conversation I have with students, is like, how they feel about that question and whether they feel obligated to have a really good answer at different points throughout high school. So, I mean, I don't think that students pursuing trades are immune to that sort of in pressure. I could see a scenario where a student who just was struggling realized that education was a real struggle for them and wanted to have an answer, could say trade school as an option, and it wouldn't like be a genuine passion of theirs. But there definitely are students who are passionate about the trade that they want to pursue. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited to see all the work that you're doing since you've come in, and I know that I appreciate the comment you made about consistency. I think that that's really important from personal experience, from having two girls, right? One of them just graduated and the other one's there. I do find that there's there was at least a lot of inconsistency in the responses that would be given relating to the post-secondary planning. So that is actually my biggest concern. That's something that interests me, but it's also something that I'm very concerned about, especially given, when we talk about crises and the kids that you're talking about, we have a very competitive population of kids. They're extremely competitive. They work very hard. Sometimes I think that their needs, if they're not met through the counseling department, they have the resources to go elsewhere. And so, their parents may be addressing those things that way. I would prefer that we're able to take care of it in our schools. I think that that is a really important part of high school counseling. I know the times have changed. I know when we were growing up, high school counseling was very much focused on the post-secondary planning, and now the needs of the population have changed. So while I understand that, I also just want to make sure that we acknowledge that, these kids who do hold themselves to very high standards oftentimes are also not those kids that are going to display crises in the way that other kids may, because of the standard they hold themselves to. And I do worry a lot about those kids and the lack of...
I do too.
Yeah. So especially because I know we have a very, very huge student population that falls into that category. And so, just something I wanted to kind of point out, and I think you did sort of point it out as well, so I wanted to also say that I think that is an important piece. To Yakub's point, I also wanted to ask, do you think that there's anything about the image of Westborough that could be portrayed differently or would play a part in the acceptances? I know that you mentioned we have had some Ivy acceptances. I know that should not necessarily be a measure of success. On the other hand, I think people like to see it every once in a while. I would love to see some kids getting into those schools when we are scoring very, very high on our SATs and very high GPAs. Sometimes though, my understanding is that the assessment of the district from where they're coming does play a part as well in those applications. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that we should be doing to improve that image.
It's a great question. So in the conversation I alluded to with the admissions representative from an Ivy League school who was visiting, I've heard people theorize that the number of AP courses that we offer is a direct factor that is contributing to students not getting into Ivy League schools. I explicitly asked that question of the admissions representative. So every time a student applies to any school, we send a high school transcript and something called a school profile that every year gets updated to list every course that's offered at the, every AP course that's offered at the high school. And what they said is, we can only evaluate a student based on what's offered to them. And so we don't punish kids for things that they were not able to be offered. That's the answer that I was given. So I guess that's one version of image, is like the school profile is like literally the piece of paper that is the image that goes with students. I mean, I think it's a little bit more complicated in that the level of data tracking that colleges are doing on students who come from different high schools, they know every kid who's come from Westborough High School, who's either applied or gone or been admitted or graduated from a school and their success. Like, I think there's a lot of things at play that are out of our control, to be totally honest. I don't have a good answer. Honestly, if I had the answer to how we could, increase the options for students, because that's all that any of us want, are just kids to have options that they're interested in or options that they feel passionate about. I don't have a good answer.
So actually, I thought your answer was great.
Yeah.
You were extremely transparent in what you heard, and I think that's been on my mind. I know that's been brought up in different settings by different people, stating that we do have, I find, a weak AP offering at the high school, or at least one that could be improved. And obviously resources play into that and all of it, but it's something to look at. And if it's something that may be setting us apart in a negative way, then we want to make sure that we're able to compete there. And that's just, and it may not be, but it's something to look at.
It's a reasonable thought. And, I don't know if the representative I was speaking to just is not able to explicitly say the truth. Like, I don't know what their directive is around that question. I'm sure the Ivy League schools get this type of question often, because everyone's trying to make sure their students have all these options available to them. So,
Another question I had was, how do you feel about how student applications and admittance has gone since things have gone test optional? Do you think our kids have benefited a lot from that, or have they taken advantage of that?
Well, I guess just like transparently, I've only been here for 2 years. Test optional admissions has existed for actually a really long time. It just became more prevalent around COVID when kids were unable to test, and so colleges had to adapt their admissions process. The vast majority of schools are still test optional since that point, but some schools, including many of the Ivies, have shifted back to requiring test scores. I think that again, like we've spoken, students generally perform very well on the SAT in Westborough. So I don't think that test optional admissions is something that is actually as helpful in Westborough as it would be at another school. There could be a valedictorian at another school who's English and math, again, that's what the test is, like English and math curriculum isn't as strong, and maybe they can't perform as well as they want to on the SAT, and so they apply test optional, and their academic record is fantastic. So I think honestly, like schools like Westborough, where there's strong academics, there's people who really value education and want their students to do well, there's resources to pay for like tutoring supports around I honestly think that the SATs are mostly, or standardized testing in general, is mostly a helpful thing for Westborough students. Like we find that the majority of kids are actually submitting test scores still, unless their score falls below, the 50th percentile of the admitted students at a given school. So, if a given school's 50th percentile for submitted SAT scores is a 1560 and somebody has a 1480, which is objectively a fantastic score,
Right.
they're not going to submit strategically. And those are some of the conversations we have in the fall with students during those senior conferences, is like, let's talk about where your current standardized testing scores are. Let's look at the schools that you're applying to. Let's look at their testing process. So I don't think it's had a drastic effect, to be honest, here. In different parts of the state and the country, I think it has probably been a boon to their admissions.
I was just going to say it might be something interesting to look at. And the reason I say is because when we went on college tours with my daughter last year, it was interesting that we had openly in the tours, people come out and say, do not submit your score if it's under X, because it will negatively impact. And we're talking about some really good scores, and the score that they're referring to, but everyone's trying to promote their school and they have to get their numbers up. And so there's strategy involved in that. But I found that really interesting because I was like, oh, wow, we're going to be holding back a really good score, but the school does not want to see the score. So strategy wise, it would be interesting to look at what is best for the kids,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. We
Thank you,
really
everyone.
enjoyed your presentation. Do you guys have any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. And we have a second great presentation tonight. So Dr. Sherry Stevens is here, along with Michelle Palermo. They have sort of a two-part presentation about kind of a student services department overview and a little bit of a deep dive into what's going on with the Early Childhood Center. So thank you.
Also in Canva.
Also in Canva. I'm going to have to up my game.
For learning. So thank you. It's my absolute pleasure to be here to provide you with our annual update for student services and welcome my colleague, again, Michelle Palermo. So we will go from sort of the big umbrella, I consider it the golf umbrella, to laser focused on what's happening at our Early Childhood Center as we try to highlight our leadership and our programming each year. So in terms of the golf umbrella, I mean, student services has many hats. We are responsible for 504 accommodation plans. As Alex spoke, that is under the direction of counselors, and they do an amazing job with that. While it does take up some of their time, we're also responsible for students who are in foster care, students who are homeless, who require home hospital tutoring, clinical services, mental health and health support, and school counseling and career readiness, special education, which we focus a lot on, and student engagement and services for homeschool students as well on IEPs. So moving to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the data, which we typically highlight, so you can see our total school enrollment, the amount of students on IEPs, which is 626 as of today, our special education percentage, which is 16.3, compared to the state. We typically run anywhere just below 16 to a little above, so that's been pretty steady in terms of what we've reported for percentages for the 13 years I've been here. And then we have the state special education rate, which is 20.6, and that continues to increase a little bit each year. So typically it has been around 17. In terms of the next slide, we look at our percentages compared to our neighbors who are closest to us. And so we have Hopkinton at 14 and Northborough Southborough at 16.6 and Shrewsbury at 14.5. And typically, again, we hover, around 16. So with room for improvement, but in terms of research and some of the things that we've done, we also see our demographics growing in a different way than potentially Hopkinton or Shrewsbury, which also has growing impact for us. Next slide. We also like to have a deeper understanding of where we are in terms of our disability categories for students who are eligible. And again, for the last 3 years, specific learning, which is at 19%, a little bit, I think 3% lower than last year. Autism, we're kind of seeing, and Michelle will talk a little bit about this, we're seeing sort of a cycle of more complex students coming into the preschool again. And then our health, which is a general category, everything from ADHD to medically complex students, and we serve them all. So anyway, we pay attention to that. That certainly drives where we are with our writing of IEPs and the resources and how we're utilizing our resources in pre-K through 12 plus. In terms of the next slide, you can see this lovely young man who's like choosing his fish very carefully for his fish pond. I just feel as a leader of this department so incredibly fortunate to have the team that I have of exceptional professionals and individuals to meet the unique needs of all learners. So again, it's an incredible team. I feel here, in terms of our data, we've been pretty flat. We hover anywhere between 230 to 237 in terms of total staff. You can see here in this particular graph the number of students on IEPs by school, and then the teachers, paras. And sometimes we do plug in temporary staff depending on the year. And those are typically supported through our IDA 240 grant, and then we assess where we are. But basically, the students drive our resource needs. Next slide. In terms of highlights from this year, we had the implementation of IEP 2.0, which came to us from the state. It was a great year of preparation and planning for the student services coordinators in terms of thinking about a guiding document for staff, rolling that out at natural times during the school year. I think it's been a seamless implementation. I'm not surprised given the nature of the professionals that we have. And hopefully, I think in terms of balance, like parents have experienced it similarly. I haven't had too much feedback. It's still a daunting document and it's a lot to digest, but I feel like the rollout of that has been really well done this year by the team. We also continue with the development and alignment of our therapeutic programming now K through 12, which gives us the consistency to work with students with emotional needs and that particular profile, and again, helps us sort of mitigate the need for students to go out, because we do feel most of the time that we do it better. And, you know, again, that's kudos to the team. And we've actually been able to bring students back from out-of-district programs as well, which is a celebration. And I just want to give a shout out to Kim, who's in our audience tonight, because she plays an essential role in that program development, along with Dr. Alex Hirschberg, who is our outside consultant. So that's been something that's been really developing nicely. And our numbers look great, and it's supported through transition for next year. So I think that programming is here to stay. We also completed our Tier 3 renovation of the borough, which are final stage of that project, which gives us a production space that's expanded for our candy store, which is doing incredibly well. And then it also expands our program space, and we're still looking for willing partners to tuition in students. You know, we think maybe we have someone on the hook that is interested, that doesn't want to replicate, which is what most districts have done as we've met with them and toured them through the borough. But we're still very hopeful that we would get tuition in, or would we be able to have the flexibility of space for the next tier of programming as we identify that. So that was very successful, and I just want to give a shout out to that team as well. We've also experienced a decrease in out-of-district students. Some of that is based on the reasons that, you know, I've provided you with. And this year, some exciting work, which Michelle will also talk about, is really the alignment as we think about that piece for pre-K to K and what that means in terms of curriculum and learning and all of the things that further align our instructional practice for our earliest learners. The next slide focuses on the challenges, which, you know, with the opportunities, there's always challenges. So while our out-of-district numbers for students have decreased, the tuition rates have increased, and some of that is just due to the nature of how those programs are run and what they're able to do within their guidelines for demanding those tuition increases, which we don't have a lot of jurisdiction over. We've also seen an increase in our transportation rates, which you've heard about, and sort of the decrease in ability to provide really reliable services for students. So we have worked with Anita, and I've been grateful for that partnership to kind of diversify our thinking where we've needed to make sure that we're getting customer service at a level that well serves our students, which is our primary focus. This year, we also had a significant increase in students experiencing homelessness since last year, so that's been incredibly challenging. And again, I just want to mention Karen Bunton, who has taken leadership in terms of that process and working with some of our most vulnerable families and welcoming students to the district and making sure that they are getting the services and support that they need. And as I believe this is my last school committee meeting, I do want to welcome Meg and Matt, and I'm very excited to know that they're on board as I transition toward retirement. And I think that you and the Westborough community and parents will be well served by their leadership. And I want to thank a team who has just been incredibly strong and thoughtful and flexible with the primary focus of students each and every day at the forefront. And change is hard for all of us, so these are T-shirts that the coordinators adopted last year as we were going into IEP 2.0 to kind of say, yeah, we love change, right? Change is our favorite. But change is inevitable, and we are here, so I want to thank you for your support for the last 13 years as I let Michelle talk a little bit about our Early Childhood Center, which I'm also incredibly grateful for her leadership and thoughtfulness over the years as this program has really developed more fully.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be back. I think it's been a couple years since I've given you an update. I'm Michelle Palermo. I'm the Early Childhood Director. I have the pleasure of working with an amazing team as well. And this is my 9th year as director of this program, and I'm really proud of what we offer every day and the experiences children are having in our fully inclusive program. So I'm just going to give you a little highlights, and I'd love to answer any questions that you have. So this is just an overview of our current stats. So for the 24-25 school year, we ran 8 classrooms servicing about 160 students. We had 6 full-day classrooms and 2 classrooms that ran a morning session and then an afternoon session. That's really based on what parents want when they apply. We have an open application process every year, and people are generally given whatever they want as long as we have space for them. So it's first come, first serve. As I mentioned, we really are running a full inclusion program. So I have co-teaching in every classroom, and we're fully supporting all children with special education needs within the context of a regular early childhood classroom and pushing in the majority of their services. So the majority of their speech and language, OT, PT. The team works very collaboratively. They really have refined and honed their skills in co-teaching, co-treating, co-planning over the 9 years that we've been kind of working on this. As Sherry mentioned a little bit earlier, we are the first source for referrals as children turn 3. And to date, we've processed approximately 60 referrals, and we have, an additional 12 students to see before September. This is really an increase back to our typical rates where we are generally receiving between 70 to 80, sometimes up to 90 referrals from community programs, from early childhood programs in the district, like childcare programs, or from early intervention, which is our biggest referral source. So we saw, obviously, a dip because during COVID, children weren't going to childcare, and early intervention was largely remote. They were doing things through telehealth, and their numbers really dropped off. And so our numbers dropped off. But I'm starting to see those numbers increase, so we'll get back up to our more typical referral rates. So, we are the first experience that lots of children are having with school, and we work hard to make that a very high-quality, developmentally appropriate, play-based experience. One of the things that is a hallmark of the program is that we have this very well-defined at this point culture of shared leadership, and staff really are play an active role in ongoing program improvement, ideas on how to refine, enhance, extend, deepen curriculum and learning. So I just want to kind of talk about some of the work that we did this year. We generally always have a family engagement priority because that homeschool partnership, especially for young children, is really incredibly important as the first stop for children in their schooling. So we always kind of have that as, how can we do this better? How can we connect more with families? What kinds of things can we do to bring families into the school? So we had a little committee, they work on it. We did a number of things, including a couple of family events, which are not typical things that we'd done in the past. So we had movie night, and then we had a multicultural game night. And it was well attended and really a smashing success. Kids love seeing their teachers after school with their parents. It's like an out-of-body experience for some of them. They're like, you do exist when I leave and go home. So we had some really great participation, and families really enjoyed that. And that was new for us. We hadn't done after-school events. We always do a family fun day, but it's in May during one of the half days. We do that in the afternoon. So the nighttime pieces were great. In partnership with Kim and with Roger Anderson, as part of our Family Engagement Day, where we invite parents in to learn a little bit or talk with us in a different way. We piloted the Setting Limits and Boundaries workshop, which has taken off, and now I see being offered at the elementary schools. That was really fun, and I think we're definitely going to keep doing that format. So just inviting parents in to talk about something that we all struggle with, which is, how do you both acknowledge children's very big feelings about things that they want to do and say, no, you may not do that thing, because that's a complicated thing. And teachers are pretty good at it. And so being able to share their ideas and strategies and give parents some of those ideas just is another way that we're kind of extending and making that connection more strong, so that experiences children are having at school and at home are more closely aligned. We also developed some just informational one-pagers on topics that are frequently brought up to us by parents. So things like self-help skills. Toileting is a big thing when we're talking about preschool children. Literacy, and again, structures and limit setting. And I think for next year, we might use those topics as jumping off points for more of these, come on in, let's talk about this thing together. If this is interesting to you, we have ideas on how this can, what we do at school and how you might be able to do that at home too. So we've done a lot of work around really deepening our connection with families and making it meaningful and developing that partnership. We had another group working on this idea of our onboarding program for our paraeducators and for substitutes. We have wonderful paras, and they're very strong, and they really are integral parts of our team. We stay in classroom teams, and so they're really able to develop their skills within the context of that structure. And when we have someone new come in, we're always trying to remember, what was the training? Did we do this? So we kind of pulled that all together into a document, into a folder that staff can use to provide onboarding for new paras, but it also helps us with our subs. We have a lot of people who love to sub in our building. We actually probably get more consistent subs taking our absences than most buildings. And I think it's because the kids are so adorably cute and it's just a lot of fun. And you're coming into a team of, you're working with other people, so you don't just have to absorb this whole class by yourself. So it's a little less daunting, I think. So we have people who come regularly, and I think if they're going to come regularly, we can help them develop their skills. So we did some work around, just being able to give them a little guidance. If you're going to be our kind of consistent sub, we'd love for you to understand, how to support children's independence, not do everything for them. That you don't have to do that as part of your job. So things like that. As Sherry mentioned, we are always looking to be better and more closely aligned with kindergarten, and really thinking about what does instruction look like at the preschool level, what does instruction look like at the kindergarten level, and we're always trying to figure out the best way to kind of bridge that gap. So this year, we decided, and we worked with the elementary school principals and the team leads, the kindergarten team leads, and our teachers went and observed former students and their kindergarten year, just to see how they were doing and to see what that transition looked like from their perspective. And that was really helpful. It actually spurred two of my teachers to come up with an actual course that they proposed and taught to a diverse group of Westborough teachers, from preschool teachers all the way through third grade, focused on playful learning. So how do you incorporate play? How do you use play as an instructional strategy? And there are a lot of resources. The state is doing a lot of things around that as well, so they were able to pull some of those pieces in. And as an inaugural course offering, was very successful. So they're offering it at the Shrewsbury Summer Institute as well. And we're really looking, as we think about professional development for next year, how can we capitalize on some of the momentum and some of the great feedback that they got from leaders and from the people who participated, and how we really think about what this looks like in preschool, where we are very much play-based. And how does that look as you go on up through school? Because play is not something that's just for little kids. It really is a component of learning that should be present in all our lives. So I have a couple of teachers who are really passionate about that, and their leadership is exciting and getting other people excited. Kindergarten teachers often come to us in the spring to see the kids that they will be getting, so they will have a chance to come in and kind of also look at what we're doing, as they always do, and we can pull some of their thoughts and ideas too as a way to jump off and thinking about more connections for next year. And then enrollment, we release our application in February for every year. This year we had 87 spots open, and as of today, we had 90 applicants. So we're fully enrolled pretty much for next year, which is impressive, especially because we did increase our class size, which I know you've had conversations about in terms of budget. So we did kind of push that a little bit, and we're able to actually achieve that level of enrollment. So that's where we're going to be starting next year, which is good. And then lastly, our just ongoing, we really have spent a lot of time working on the curricula that we use. This is now our 7th year using it. It was developed by Boston Public Schools. At this point, we have enhanced it, refined it, expanded it in many, many ways, and continue to do so. It's just an ongoing process. This year we had, we participated in really focused professional development on writing and what that looks like at the early childhood grade, on math, on science and STEM, and on supporting our English language learners, because lots of the students that choose to participate in our program are English language learners. We also reviewed some of the work that Boston has done to revise the curriculum and incorporated some of that into our own work. And then in terms of our special education programming, we had our speech and language pathologists and our occupational therapists, physical therapists have kind of gotten together and have been reviewing research about the efficacy of co-treating in like a speech and motor group. And so they created that and have been really working with some of our students and seeing some really kind of exciting growth in that. So there's a lot of, I'm very proud of the team that we have. They really are shared leaders in our program improvement and development in an ongoing way. So it's a fun, exciting place to work. If you've never visited, we'd love you to come and see what we do. That's it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. I'll start with Steve. Do you have any questions?
Well, first, thank you both for your presentation. It's really good, and it's great to hear, I guess, the program is blossoming from, from start to now, and that, in fact, the enrollment is now applied what we had hoped for relative to budget discussions, which I'm afraid we'll use it probably for something else that we didn't even anticipate yet. But anyway, so other than that, I don't have any particular questions. I think it's great to see you both here and to talk about these two programs, as well as Kim's been here before to talk about the borough as well. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Jane?
Thank you both so much. This was great. Sherry, first I wanted to ask you about the, on the slide with the bar chart of all the different schools. So it looks like from Gibbons to the high school, there's a huge, or a drop in the number of kids on IEPs. I mean, just because the high school is 4 years and Gibbons is 2. So can, any reflection on that and what goes into that? Is that kids who are like going off of an IEP going into the high school? Do they shift to a 504? How does that look?
I think all of those are true. Yeah, definitely as kids move through the high school. And I think even through Gibbons, like their self-identity is strengthening, and some students are, just feel like they want to be more independent, and we try, certainly least restrictive, to move them to 504 or, curriculum accommodation plan or whatever can help them be successful. But some of that, particularly as they get to the high school, is sort of the self-identification of, thinking they need to be off an IEP and do something differently. So I think that's an excellent observation on your part. And yeah.
And so that's done in collaboration with the student and the parent. And
Absolutely.
It feels like everyone's.
And technically, we cannot take a student off an IEP without doing some reassessment there as well. So that's typically what's warranted. But it's often times, and where the student is sort of initiating the discussion around that as part of their growth and identity and sort of self-realization.
Thanks.
Yeah.
The other thing, I think I was thrilled to see that the out-of-district placements are down. It's so hard for us to tell because, like you noted, the cost is
Right.
up.
It's not
And it
reflected
sounds
there.
like, thanks to Kim and work that she and her team are doing, that you've identified this subset of students that you could bring back in or prevent going out with the therapeutic program. Are there, in light of out-of-district costs going up, are there other kind of pockets of students that presumably the therapeutic group was a large enough group that it made sense to spend the resources to develop that program. Are there other kind of pockets? I feel like I've forever heard dyslexia as an area that, there's a need around. Or are there other pockets of students, if the out-of-district price tag per student is going up, then developing our own in-house programs the calculation changes a little bit.
Yeah, of
Are
course.
there other, areas where you think we could think about that?
I think, again, we really have a strong and wide array of programming for students. I think sometimes you get to that place either through litigation or it's just what's right for the student at that time. I think in terms of where we are when you're thinking about dyslexia, and I know the standard is sort of language-based program, like we've created that more organically. And while we may not by title call it that, we certainly have the resources, for developing models, that have been proven in terms of data for progress, but maybe we need to label it. I don't know, But I think that's one place that we sort of focus on and recognize, especially coming off, lots of dyslexia, changes in regulation and COVID and like all of the things that impacted reading for students with that profile. But I think in terms of our other program, I feel pretty good about that. And I think our numbers really are pretty exceptional when we look at out of district. But of course, I would always be open, as I know Meg would, if there was further conversation to be had around that. I mean, certainly, I think that's where sort of the innovation versus regulation comes in to this work, which is exciting from a leadership perspective and I think from a parent perspective. So I think we're always gathering that feedback.
And then, Michelle, I've never been to the preschool, so I'll probably take you up on it. I mean, the new preschool. I was at the old preschool with both of my kids. And I am just so thrilled to hear you talking about the emphasis on building the community with the families. I think it's something that as a district, we see like that involvement from the community and the parents dropping. And so it's so great that you're starting it strong at the preschool level. And so that's kind of the way they'll feel about their, connection with the school. So I think that's so great. Thank you.
Jakob?
Yes, hi. Thank you for the sweets. Always enjoyed them. Thank you for the
students.
presentation to both of you. I have just a few quick questions. One on the slide before that, if you could just help me understand these percentages. I'm a little bit confused because they add up to 53. So these are the percentages of all the 600 odd number of students that are on IEP?
Yeah, so students on IEPs, and there's, multiple disability categories, but sort of these are the three that are central for Westborough Public Schools right now in terms of the highest percentages for our students. Yes.
Thank you. And on the next slide, just one quick question. I noticed two things here in the elementary schools. Hastings has the higher number of students on IEPs than the other two schools. And then Armstrong and Fales have almost identical number of students, but different number of paras. And I guess that reflects the nature of the IEPs that requires more paras.
Yeah, sort of complexity or intensity of student profile against, the numbers, so to speak. So it's a layer of complexity that drives that resource.
So I guess a question about the Hastings versus the other two schools is maybe to Allison too, because you mentioned at the last meeting about potentially redistricting. Is that something we're going to be looking at as well? Would it help to bring those numbers to similar numbers at each building? Or not?
I'm not sure. I think one of the things we'll need to look at is sort of distribution of students across the three schools, and it could be that those things align. I think we'll want to factor in a bunch of things that are important. I think balancing permanent and rental housing is a way to kind of have more balanced school populations between the three schools. We want to be careful about geography. We don't want folks going all the way outside where they are. So a lot of factors to consider there. That is work where there are folks who specialize in sort of running scenarios, and we'll be reaching out to some consultants to look at, can they run through that with us? And those data will come out of that whole process too. Sometimes the IEP data, though, it kind of emerges in elementary school. So you won't necessarily know ahead of time because students do get evaluated in early childhood, but sometimes not until first, second, third grade too. So it can it can be a little hard to predict.
That's fair. Thank you. One more question, actually, too. One, I was curious about homelessness. You noticed increase last year. Do you know the nature of the homelessness? Are these students that had home before and they lived in Westborough and they lost housing, or are they didn't have housing to begin with?
I think now, we know there's some stabilization, like we see sort of the numbers flattening a bit from where we were at the beginning of the year, with some stability in housing, and we can be more planful and predictable about, what the numbers are going to look like. I think it's still the number of the refugees and all of the more transient families that came to Westborough, and again, maybe had ties to other schools of origin, so just kind of navigating that process felt pretty robust this year, and particularly for Karen. So,
Okay.
But we are seeing now some stabilization and sort of flattening of the numbers.
That's good.
Yeah.
And last question to you, and then one more to Michelle. The IEP 2.0, is that a new type of IEP? I mean, a new format for the IEP? Will it impact who qualifies for those services or how they're delivered?
It won't impact who qualifies. I think it was sort of the state's initiative to kind of retailer where we were and sort of characterize each section of the IEP as more, I don't know how I want to describe it, like detailed, but for me, like I always look for efficiency in any process, and I don't know that the state accomplished that, but I would be looking for some parent feedback on that, but certainly it's something that, we stage through from a team. It is what it is, but it doesn't affect eligibility and how students would qualify, et cetera.
Right.
It's just kind of like articulating the sections more, which probably took it from 30 pages to 62, I
That's
think
good to
maybe
know.
some of the biggest challenges we had were technology itself, and realigning our web-based software to meet the needs of the state. But it really, I don't think has had any negative impact on kids. It's just been a learning process for all of us, parents included.
Thank you. And well, thank you for all the time you spend in our district. Thank you very much for your work. And Michelle, I just want to say, I like you have a very thoughtful program. I like the outreach, the transition to kindergarten, visiting the kids later on, elementary school. I think it's all great. Just one curious question about, I guess now you're seeing students that were born during COVID or around that time. Do you see any trends in those kids? I've heard from one of the preschool or daycare teachers a couple of years ago, they were seeing problems with speech. Is that something you see as well? Or, yeah.
Well, at this point, the 3-year-olds we're seeing now were not born during COVID. So we're kind of out of the bubble, out of the COVID bubble. So the kids that we are seeing now were born in, it's 2025, so they were born in 2022. So they kind of are back to their typical, but certainly the students that we saw during, who were born in 2020, there were certainly speech issues that I think it's a little difficult to quantify it because of the referral numbers were down so much because children weren't anywhere where they were being seen by people who typically referred to us. Mm-hmm. And we definitely saw children who had been impacted by the fact that people were wearing masks. And it's very hard to learn to pronounce things when you can't see people's faces and mouths. But I think we worked through with servicing those children because they were quick fixes. Because once you can see how to pronounce, how articulation, then that tends to be a little more quick. So it was kind of, yes, we certainly saw an impact, not just with speech, but with children's social and emotional development in particular, their behavior and things of that nature. But at this point, I feel like we're out of the bubble, because the children we're seeing now, like I said, are born in 2022. In fact, this year, we kind of all said to ourselves, is it done? Are we done now? Are we over? Because it felt much more like a typical year for us.
That's good to hear. Thank you very much.
Tim?
Start by saying thank you both for the presentation, especially Sherry. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done in the district, just all your time. My first question is related to Jane's as well, talking about the therapeutic programming. I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit about what it really looks like to bring back some of those families. Like, is it purely voluntary? Is there outreach? Just curious what that looks like.
Most times it is based on student work and progress and growth in the out of district, that leads us to the pivotal point of they're ready for least restrictive environment, whatever that means. And in terms of the therapeutic program, that gives us like a great stage for them to step onto that has lots of support attached to it, whether it's behavior analysts, therapeutics, special ed teacher in a very controlled environment so they can feel comfortable coming back to the big stage, beginning to make peer relationships, all of the pieces that then hopefully lead them from that program to more general inclusion, which has been the experience. And of course, with parent, readiness and lots of conversation and collaboration as well.
My second question is relating to the homelessness as well. It is great to hear that it seems like that is leveling out in some respects, even though obviously the numbers are still concerning. I am curious, sorry, my phone's going off, which is distracting me. Relating to homelessness, I'm just curious if there's any procedures, anything like that are immediately triggered when the school district finds out that a student is homeless?
There's certainly, Karen is the point person for sort of disseminating that information in a very confidential way, but to team members that will be receiving the student within the respective schools so they can set them up to certainly have someone that can greet them and reach out to the family and make sure that they have the resources that they need as part of that transition for the student to get to school. And again, kudos to the Westborough community because there's so many organizations that also, are at the ready to support families, whether it be with food or school supplies or, just a place to have conversation if they need to do so. So, yes.
Sure, thank you. And my last question for you, Sherry, I may have misheard you, but it sounded like you alluded to, you were talking about the Tier 3 at the Borough program and alluded to a Tier 4. Are you able to speak at all on what that might look like?
Yeah, I think Tier 3 is kind of the final chapter in terms of renovation and where we need to be for physical space at the borough. I think Tier 4 is yet in some ways to be imagined, certainly given the program and the students that we have now. Like, it's not a problem to fill that space and to be working both on programmatic means and curriculum between 2 floors. And then we also now have the means to increase our production. And I think Easter really, particularly this year, was all about more specialized orders and corporate orders and special gourmet Easter baskets and like all of the things. And upstairs, if you haven't visited, you should. But really, it was literally like candy making at its best with kids trying to also make their lunches and prep. And it was it's a great problem to have, right? That means that we are at a crossroad for growth and expansion, and we've accomplished that goal. So in terms of the next level, whether it's we continue borough programming and we're tuitioning in students, or we identify in the next chapter of Westborough Public Schools sort of another program that would be well-meaning for the community and would also fit that space, we can share, we can be good partners in that expansion. So, and I know that's at the forefront of Erin LaPrade, who is the director of that program, and Kristen, who is the store manager. Like, their strategic vision is always like, what is the next step, and how do we grow and how do we continue to innovate? So I can step away and feel good because I love the innovation part. So I'm like, you have to stay at it. So, yeah.
Awesome, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One question for Michelle. I know that you spoke about when the teachers went up to the kindergarten to look at what's happening there, and it sounded like it's regularly in the spring they will come down, the kindergarten teachers will come down to talk to the students. I just want to confirm, is that a one-off, or is that an ongoing thing that the teachers do go up to the kindergarten level to observe what the students are doing?
This was the first year we went there in the fall, and that was just kind of our way of thinking about how are our students doing? And these are kids we know, so what do they look like when they're in kindergarten? And then we can come back and reflect, are we doing what we need to do to prepare them? Do we have do we have shared expectations? Do we have any wondering questions about things that we see in kindergarten that might be things that we want to kind of explore more with kindergarten teachers? So that part was new. The kindergarten teachers coming down to take a look at kids who they're going to see in kindergarten next year, that's been going on for lots of years. So,
I guess I just asked because I think it's a fantastic idea and would love to see it continued, so.
yeah, we would too. I mean, I think sometimes we have this conversation that preschool and kindergarten really should be really very close together. And because we're in our own separate buildings and there are 3 kindergarten programs, it can be, there's a barrier to that we want to try and figure out a way to erase, because they should have more shared professional time together, I think.
Thank you.
It's a great case study, and we can do our research organically to inform practice and continue to augment what's best for our earliest learners. So it's exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sherry, question. What do you find is the appetite for the tuition in, for students tuitioning in for the borough program? I'm curious, I wonder if it's a very specific district profile that would want to participate in that, because cost-wise, unless you have a certain number of students, it could make very well sense to adopt the actual program, right, and start one of your own. So what are you finding in terms of that for people's appetite for that?
I mean, I think, again, like the borough program has been, again, like an interesting development and research study for us. And I think the profile of student that's there currently is been wonderful, but I think we're going to diversify the profile more and more. And I think that is the appetite. That is the appetite to be flexible, to meet the needs of the learners that are before us, and to shift our resources and to make sure that our environment is conducive to welcoming them. And I think, there could be many exciting opportunities for more diverse program. I know Erin is now working, to try to get corporations more involved in not, I would say, acceptance. I think we're there, of students being part of the organization, but having them educated about what it means to have students really meaningful, included, and productive, employees of the corporation. So like, how do we branch ourselves out to kind of be like maybe that coach for that corporation to make sure they have stability in a train the trainer model, et cetera. So
I don't have any other questions. I just want to thank you. I know you said this is probably your last meeting. So sad. I guess make sure Meg knows that we get chocolate every meeting that she comes.
I will make sure that's part of my
Pass that
transition
message
plan. Good
along.
point, Sarah, 'cause I don't think I put that in there, but I will for sure.
And,
so.
I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I also want to thank you for this beautiful gift of the Sugar Shack that you've left us and that you've, helped launch. So this is something that is really a benefit to the community, and it's something that we all cherish very much. So thank you for that work.
Yeah,
and we're looking forward to Meg moving that work forward.
Yeah.
And we hope to see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the support.
Yes.
It's
Thank you,
been
Michelle, for
a
coming.
great
Really
journey.
appreciate it.
All right.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so I think we can
Thank you.
move on. I think the next item is that we're going to be just looking at the dates for our upcoming school committee meetings for next year, for the next calendar year, for the next school year. Everybody has a copy of this. I don't know, was it emailed also to everyone or just?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know if you've all had a chance to look at it. I have, and it doesn't seem to conflict with, we don't have, it doesn't seem to conflict with anything as far as I can see. I don't know if anyone has any comments about it.
Just one request, if we could share this calendar with the Fine Arts Department.
Yes.
I mean, this year, I think it only happened once, so it's much better than it used to be. But if we could just make sure that we don't have performances on those dates,
Yes.
I'll be very thankful.
Got it.
Anyone else?
No,
Okay, so this is not something we need, do we need to?
It's
no.
not a vote.
Just
I think it's just, making sure the date, mostly, these are your meetings. I want to make sure everybody can be here and before we publish it and put it on the website and.
Yes, thank you for that.
This is called early warning.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And then we will move on to citizens' request. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak before the committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is school committee reports. Steve?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment that we've started on the 3 items that I had talked about, 3-4 meetings ago in terms of those things that I wanted to work on with Tim as well. We had our first meeting at Hastings in regards to the transportation issues there. Allison, Chip Dapplite, Michelle, Julia, and Kelly were there, and that also, by virtue of questions, Kelly will work with the DPW to work on some of the items that we talked about. It was very productive. People were given assignments to try to begin the work of finding answers to the various questions that we had, and hopefully solutions for it. And so that's underway. I have talked to Kelly about the chillers at Mill Pond, and she's working on an approach that might be very cost-saving to the school system, but I haven't heard lately that's because we fell into the black hole of school vacation, for which everybody goes somewhere, including your brain. So anyway, so I'll pick up with that shortly. And then the last thing is to begin to discuss how we might air condition the remaining rooms at Armstrong. So there's a little background needed there. Number one, we have air ventilators in the rooms, and so the hardware that would be needed to change it is more likely mini splits. Okay, and if we had mini splits, then we have to have access to where the condensers would be, whether it be on the roof or next to the building or whatever. And so there's some, technical things we have to work on in order to even come up with something to present to the school committee at some future meeting that would say, well, here's an option or 3 options of what we might do. But the bottom line on Armstrong is the roof design for it without augmentation really can't support anything. And that was one of the issues that we had when we added the classrooms there. So when we dealt with the similar kind of issue at Hastings, we basically created support above the roof in order to carry some ductwork. And we may have to do something like that at Hastings. But those are all things that are to be worked on, I guess. And so I just wanted to give you a quick update. And as I said, Tim was there as well, and he may have his own comments about what we did and what we didn't do. So,
I just have a question about that. So this idea of mini splits, my understanding is that the longevity on those is not very, very long. They're not exactly the best functioning.
They do need maintenance, but the point being is once you've got the access to the point, okay, in other words, where the device would be or whether the condenser is the problem, as compared to anything else we might do, which would require internal changes to the building, would be very expensive. So yes, that is true. On the other hand, to the extent that the town does additional solar, then in effect, other than replacing the equipment, it may be free, which is a totally different aspect to everything else we do here. So anyway, those are all part of what would be, let's say, accumulated in a report and presented, for yes or no, or maybe, or this is what you should consider and go forward and get the answers to this. But on the other hand, like I said, when I brought it up, it's unfair for the students in the few rooms, or majority of classrooms anyway, at Armstrong, not to have the benefits that all the other schools now have. So fair's fair, and I want to see that at least we have an opportunity to try to make it so.
Thank you. Jean?
Nothing to report.
Great. Jakub?
Nothing to report.
Tim?
No, I just thank Steve for providing the report. Nothing else to add and nothing else to report, so thank you.
Regan?
Yeah, I just have updates about the schools. So for Fails, the second graders have a field trip to the Handover Theater tomorrow. Third graders have enrichment in the Fails Makerspace with the Discovery Museum. And then first graders will have a visit on May 6th from author Megan Litwin. And there's also a spring string performance on May 9th. For Armstrong, Going Buggy performance will be on May 9th for the second graders. And they also have an Armstrong drumming night on May 7th. For Hastings, today there was a folk dance night from 6:30 to 7, and first graders are also going on field trip tomorrow. At Mill Pond, next week is going to be Teachers Appreciation Week, and there's going to be activities throughout the week organized by Mill Pond Parent Group. At Gibbons, there's going to be a spring concert on the 6th and the 8th, and MCAS is going to begin the following week. And lastly, at the high school on May 7th, there's a small string ensemble concert. On May 9th and 10th, there's a Westborough High School spring show. On May 9th as well, there's going to be the first girls flag football game under the lights, and it's a juniors against seniors. Seniors have commitment day this Friday where they will wear their college shirts of where they're going to school. Also over break, there was the Canada field trip, which some students went on, and everyone had a great time and a lot of positive things were said. And then lastly, prior to break, some of the high school students got the opportunity to be on the panel to ask questions to the finalists of the assistant superintendent job, which was a unique and special opportunity, which was fun to do. So,
Thank you. I think that brings us to our last item, which is the approval of the meeting minutes from April 9th, 2025. Do I have a motion on that?
So move.
I have
I'll
a second?
Yep, second.
Any discussion around that? All in favor?
Aye.
5-0-0. And then I will move to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Anyone want to debate that? All in favor?
Aye.
So adjourned. Thank you.